orgy of horror. Makes maddening music on your nerve strings.
Oh, honestly, Sheila, the way you dig blood, anyone would think you were a vampire.
Yes, well, you better watch out next time I give you a love bite.
Then thrill fun becomes total terror.
And what do we do about each other? About one of us being dangerous?
Horror House.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
I know they're gonna catch me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, Doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
This is the American International Podcast. I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And today we're knocking on the door of absolute terror with Horror House from 1970.
Horror House was directed by Michael Armstrong, from a screenplay by Michael Armstrong and Jerry Levy, writing as Peter Marcus, and produced by Tony Tensor and Louis M. Hayward for Tygon British Film Productions and American International Pictures.
Horror House stars Frankie Avalon as Cris, Jill Haworth as Sheila, Dennis Price as Inspector Bill, Mark Wynter as Gary, George Sewell as Bob Kellett, Gina Warwick as Sylvia, Richard O'Sullivan as Peter, Carol Dilworth as Dorothy, Julian Barnes as Richard.
Also appearing are Veronica Doran as Madge, Robin Stewart as Henry, Jan Holden as Peggy, Clifford Earle as Police Sergeant Pelly, and Robert Raglan as John Bradley.
Horror House opens on the exterior of a deserted old house. Inside, a ghost seems to be enjoying himself immensely.
We hear the sounds of moaning and kind of grunting. It's the kind of sounds one might expect to hear at a horror house, not a horror house.
And then the credits roll. The title that we're watching is Horror House. There's eerie, suspenseful music playing over defocused candlelight.
After the credits have run their course, text appears on the screen that says, "For years, people have been fascinated by the eerie possibilities lurking within the walls of haunted houses. Their legends are as varied as they are timeless. And so it is with this house, which must forever withstand the curiosity of ages."
Okay, whatever that means. And now two cars are racing down the road.
In the second car, we see Cris in the driver's seat, and Sheila is in the passenger seat. In the back are Dorothy, Gary, and Henry. Sheila says that they should have brought Richard in their car to tell them about the place they're going to and how it came to be haunted.
From the back seat, Gary tells her that she's a bloodthirsty girl. Over in the other car, in the driver's seat, we have Peter, passenger seat, Richard, the one who knows all about the haunted houses. In the back of that car, we have Madge and Sylvia.
Sylvia offers the others a sweet, but no one partakes.
And Richard tells the driver that he needs to turn here. He's the one that knows the way to the haunted house. Back in the first car, Sheila asks of everyone, "Where the hell are we?" And Cris tells her that this was your idea.
The two cars reach the house and all exit the vehicles. As they're doing this, a third car pulls up nearby and a man gets out. We'll find out later that this is Bob Kellett, and he watches as the group approaches the house.
We'll find out a lot later who he is and what his deal is.
But I got his name in there, so don't have to worry about it anymore. You just call him Bob.
They look at the exterior of the house, and one of them says that they wouldn't spend the night there alone. And they go in with the strange man still lurking outside.
They start looking around, and they find some candles and light them, allowing Cris to save the batteries in his flashlight. Gary finds a piano and runs his fingers over the strings, making an eerie sound.
Sheila says that she really digs this house. "You would," says Cris. I guess she has a reputation. And then Richard tells the tale of how the house came to be haunted.
He tells them that the house belonged to one family for over 200 years. They were a strange bunch. One night, about 20 years ago, one of them went mad, hacked all the others to pieces, then killed himself. They ask him if the victims are supposed to be the ones haunting this house, but Richard informs them that no, the ghost is supposed to be that of the killer.
"Come on," says Cris, "let's explore the place." As they walk around, they spot a hole in the ceiling. Peter says that there must have been a fire there, and Richard confirms this.
"What happened? Did the ghost get chilly?" quips Cris. "Maybe," says Richard. "Nobody knows how it started."
As they're looking around, Sylvia says that they should just have a quick look-see and then go for coffee. She's dying for a coffee. and the gang all scoff at her.
Peter doesn't want coffee, he wants a real drink. They left their booze out in the car, so he goes out to retrieve it. Then Henry suggests that they have an orgy, and Cris is all about that.
But Sheila counters that they should have a seance instead.
Gary asks Dorothy what her preference is, orgy or seance. Dorothy says she fancies neither, and they share a kiss.
And then everybody goes into a hole in the wall, which leads them to another room.
Meanwhile, Bob, the man outside, is lighting a cigarette. They go exploring down a corridor.
The gang mentions that the ghost should be active during a full moon. Sylvia is still complaining as she's adamantly against this non-coffee-based idea.
Sheila, on the other hand, thinks this is fun, and Cris agrees with her. He thinks it's a gas. It's a house of the dead, says Richard. Just then shutters start banging, startling the group.
Was it the wind or a ghost?
Sylvia says she's had enough. She's ready to go, and asks who's coming with, and Henry volunteers to go with her.
He escorts her to the front door, which he can't open because it's stuck or they bolted it. And then we see a hand reaching out to Sylvia. It grabs her, but it's only Gary. He offers to drive Sylvia home. She says, "But you came here with Dorothy." And anyway, she's a country girl. She was made for moonlight strolls.
Henry is finally able to get the door open, and they head outside, and Bob is still out there watching them. Gary asks Henry to hold the door open. Henry asks if Gary's coming back, and Henry says he doesn't know. Bob glares as Gary takes Sylvia's face in his hands and kisses her. Then Gary offers her his jacket, telling her she'll freeze without it. She thanks him and says she'll see him tomorrow. They share another kiss, and she heads off into the night.
Inside, the gang is headed upstairs for a little look around. Outside, Sylvia is putting on Gary's coat and then walks down the lane to the main road, followed by the strange man. In her white leather mini dress with strategic cutouts and white go-go boots, she doesn't have to wait long to get picked up by a passing car. But rather than follow her, Bob turns back towards the house.
Back with the group, they walk out onto a balcony, and despite the stairway leading down, Sheila asks how they're supposed to get down from there. Jump, says Richard.
Richard explains there's no other way in or out of the home besides the balcony and the door on the ground level where they entered, and that is currently locked.
There's a brief scare when Sheila leans over the balcony a little too far and almost falls, but Cris catches her, and then they all decide it's better if they head back inside.
And now the moon is full. Bob is still outside.
Probably waiting for Gary to make another appearance.
Downstairs, the gang are playing some music on a little reel-to-reel player. It's the smallest reel-to-reel player I've ever seen. Gary asks for the time, and Cris tells him it's 5 to midnight.
That's 5 minutes to the witching hour, and Cris switches off the music. We're not really going through with the seance, are we? Asks Madge. Sheila suggests they blow out the candles. We're not going to be in the dark as well, complains Madge. Richard commands for silence, which results in fits of giggles.
They hold hands, and then nothing. They do nothing else. But the house starts creaking. The boys get up from the seance and start looking around the house.
Richard separates from the others and closes and bolts the door, and comes back to report that noise was just the wind. They decide that because the moon is full, it seems like a good time to hunt for ghosts. Peter asks what they're supposed to do if they find any. Let's hope we don't, says Madge. Richard tells them to light their candles and to follow him. However,
they all end up splitting up and hunting through the house by candlelight. Richard drops his candle, and it rolls away from him. He gets down on the floor, but in the dark he can't find it. All of a sudden he sees somebody holding a candle down the corridor, but it's so dark he can't tell who it is.
As the figure approaches him, he's relieved to see that the footsteps belong to Sheila.
Sheila bends down and helps him spot his candle under the radiator and then relights it for him.
Elsewhere in the house, Madge is cautiously walking alone, and Peter sneaks behind her and grabs her hair, startling her. Madge scolds him for this.
Upstairs, Gary sees a rat.
Peter, is that you? He quips. He smiles to himself for being such a funny guy, but the smile fades as he rounds a corner, and a knife penetrates his neck. A second thrust of the knife knocks the candle from Gary's hand, and Gary falls to the ground, the victim of multiple stab wounds.
He crawls to that hole in the ceiling, which to him here is the floor. Blood dripping from all his wounds and down to the first floor.
On the first floor, the tape player is still spinning, but the tape has ran out, so the end is flapping with every rotation. Dorothy comes into the room with her candle. She sees the dead and bloodied body of Gary and screams and faints.
Everyone comes to her aid. Cris picks her up and hustles her and everyone else out of the room except for Peter, who's barfing in the corner.
Don't come in, for God's sake, don't come in, says Cris. The girls are very upset at this turn of events. We never should have come here, sobs Madge. Cris rushes in to report that the door's still bolted. He tells Henry to keep an eye on the door, while the other fellows go off to explore, leaving the three women sobbing together on a blanket.
Richard and Cris go upstairs and stare wide-eyed at Gary's body. Downstairs, Sheila tries to comfort Dorothy as Madge babbles about how coming there was a bad idea. Well, duh. And Peter still looks sick. Cris returns with Richard and tells the boys that they need to search the house from top to bottom and leave the girls there.
At this, Madge starts to freak out. She charges at Henry, who's watching the door, and she says that she has to get out. She grabs Henry and starts throttling him. Cris, Richard, and Peter run back downstairs to see what all the commotion is, and Peter grabs Madge and starts slapping her silly, trying to calm her down.
Is he trying to calm her down? Because it looks like he's been waiting to beat her up, and finally he has an excuse.
Cris pulls Peter off Madge, and Madge is thrown to the floor.
Cris comforts Peter, of all people. And then they all return to the seance room, where shell-shocked Dorothy had been left to grieve alone. Henry wants to take her home, but Cris refuses to allow this. No one can leave, not until they solve this thing. And they're not going to be going to the cops either.
He turns to Richard and asks if he's sure that there's no way in or out of the house without using the front door. Richard confirms that there's no other way. Then this means that the house is empty and the main door is bolted. That leaves them with only one answer. Sheila thinks he must be crazy to suggest that the murderer might be one of them. It couldn't be one of them. They all knew Gary. Did we, though? Asks Cris. Do any of us really know each other?
Madge, her face scratched, asks if Cris is trying to scare them. Cris says, imagine how scared you'll be when the police arrive at the same conclusion.
How would you like to be a suspected psychopath and be treated like one? One of us must be a psychopath, says Cris. Now, can any of you prove that you didn't kill Gary?
Henry reveals that he had a run-in with the police over some drugs, so being in a house with a dead body is not a good look for him.
Sheila says that Gary couldn't have been killed by a girl. A girl wouldn't have had the strength, but Cris counters that any psychopath, male or female, can have superhuman strength when aroused.
Aroused? Well, we did hear that ghost at the beginning of the movie. Seemed a bit aroused. Richard asks what happens now. Cris says they have to move Gary's body miles away so it won't be connected to them if or when it's found. And Madge gasps.
The others are skeptical of this plan. They'll know that Gary was with them all tonight. Maybe he left the party early, suggests Cris. Or maybe they won't even notice. Maybe he'll just be missing. Can anybody think of anything better?
I can think of a lot of better things than that. Sheila is speechless. Henry thinks that all sounds a bit callous. And then Cris says that they all have to stick to the same story. Cris looks rather murderous as he says this.
If they stick to the same story, though, they should all pull through this just fine.
He crouches down in front of Dorothy to ensure her compliance. Does she understand what they're going to do? She has to fall in with them or it won't work.
Dorothy looks up and whispers, "One of us is insane."
Henry picks up a blanket and says, "We'll need this." Henry unbolts the door as Peter, Cris, and Richard bring Gary's blanket-wrapped body downstairs.
Henry informs the women that while he and the others take care of the body, Peter will give them all a lift home.
This looks like it might break Sheila.
Now we are probably at a police station, though it doesn't look like any police station I've ever seen.
Well, from the outside it does. Just from the inside it looks like somebody's den.
John Bradley, who seems to be the chief inspector, walks into the office of Inspector Bill Bradley, no relation, and he hands Bill a file of a missing boy who hasn't shown up for work in 3 days. This isn't really Bill's department, but John says that he has his reasons for using Bill on this one.
This man lives at home, and his mother's going into care as she's getting on in years, so they really want to find him.
And Bill would be interested to know the boy's name is Scott. Gary Scott. Sergeant Pelly, who is seated in the room, looks up. "Scott, eh? We don't have to start from scratch then, do we, sir?" "No," says Bill. I don't know why he said it like that, and I laughed every time I heard it.
Now we're at Sheila's flat. She and Cris are talking. She can't believe it's been 4 days with nothing from the police. Supposing the police find out about the house. Why should they, asks Cris. And even if they did, they burned everything. The blankets, everything on the floor. Sheila marvels that she doesn't feel as she ought. Cold. And she can't believe that one of them is a murderer. But which one?
Now we're in town, and Inspector Bill Bradley is questioning Gary's boss. We see that Sylvia works across the street as she's adjusting a mannequin in a shop window.
Later we see Sheila leaving work. Bob pulls up to the store and tells her that he's there to pick her up, but she's not pleased to see them. But she gets in his car anyway? Kinda dumb.
As they drive, Sylvia says she thought they were going to finish things. "That was your idea, not mine," says Bob.
Sylvia still wants to end things, but Bob's not one of her long-haired kids. He doesn't brush off so easily.
And he's not going to let her just throw him away like yesterday's garbage.
And she should know that about him because they've been so close. She asks how well his wife knows him. Too bloody well, he says.
Sylvia tells Bob that she wants things to change. What she really wants is someone young. Bob slams on the brakes and turns to face Sylvia. "I'm not the linen, you know. You can't change me whenever you feel like it." Sylvia says they had some fun, but she needs to move on. And she didn't mean to hurt him. Bob tells her that he won't be let down so easily, and he'll be keeping an eye on her. Sylvia tells Bob that he'll just be wasting his time, but Bob's got plenty of that.
And then Sylvia gets out of the car and starts walking.
Back at the police station, Inspector Bradley is discussing the case with Sergeant Pelly. The inspector hands Pelly a picture of Dorothy Pullman, telling him that she's a receptionist at a hotel nearby. He wants Pelly to question her and to bring in Gary Scott's compatriots from that drug bust last year. So Dorothy is walking home from work when Pelly stops her. He asks her to step into the car. "All right," she says.
Pelly says that he knew that Dorothy would prefer they talk there rather than at her work. And then he asks her about Gary, who's missing. She plays dumb and says she doesn't remember the last time she saw him. Pelly sees her looking furtively around and makes a mental note of that. She then claims to have seen him a week ago at a party, but not afterwards, as they had a row. She says the row wasn't about anything in particular.
"Perhaps you'd better start at the beginning," says Pelly.
So we flash back to the beginning of Haunted House of Horror.
Dorothy flashes back to meeting Gary at work for coffee. They pass by the window where Sylvia is working, and Gary introduces Sylvia and Dorothy to each other. Gary tells Sylvia he'll see her tonight, and then Gary and Dorothy head out for that coffee.
But even though this is Dorothy's flashback, we stay with Sylvia, who talks to her coworker Peggy. Peggy thinks that Dorothy looks like a nice girl.
At the coffee house, Dorothy says she didn't know Sylvia was coming to the party tonight. Gary says that's because she didn't ask him, and he didn't ask Sylvia. They hang out with the same crowd and often end up in the same places.
Dorothy asks when Gary's picking her up. Gary makes a face. He's not picking her up. He has a bachelor party to go to first, but she can go directly to Chris's flat and he'll meet her there later.
She says he'll just turn up stoned, but he promises to only have one drink. She tells him she'll see him tonight, and she leaves.
And now we're at the most boring party ever at Chris's apartment.
We see Cris and Sheila, Richard and Henry, and Peter and Madge, and they're all sitting around while the unnamed characters are dancing, and they seem to be having a much better time.
Peter's sitting with Madge in front of the front door. He says he's seen better parties. She wants a kiss and puckers up, and he pecks her cheek, much to her disappointment. The doorbell goes off, and Peter stands up to open it. It's Gary and his bachelor party friends. He's absolutely legless and needs to A, avoid Dorothy, and B, lie down somewhere.
And his two friends from the bachelor party help him inside and put him into bed. Peter goes in to supervise and asks Madge to keep a lookout for Dorothy. Peter asks Gary if he has any messages for the folks back home. Don't tell Dorothy, says Gary.
And then Sylvia arrives, and her first question is, where's Gary? She finds out that he's alone in the bedroom and goes to him. And remember, we're in Dorothy's flashback here.
Downstairs, Dorothy has gotten wind of Gary's arrival and starts looking for him. Back upstairs, Gary wakes up and is surprised to see Sylvia sitting over him. She climbs into bed with him, and they both look up when the door opens and Peter stumbles in. Out, says Gary. Peter apologizes and says he thought he may have left his cigarettes in there.
Then he leaves. Gary turns to Sylvia and asks, "Are you trying to ruin me?" "Me ruin you?" she says. That's a switch. Peter goes downstairs, smirking, and asks for a fag. Cris says, "Excuse me?" He meant a cigarette.
Back in the bedroom, Sylvia tries to get Gary to have some fun with her, but Gary has 4 reasons why they shouldn't. 1, he isn't feeling well. 2, Dorothy's downstairs, and the two of them are supposed to be together. And 3, this is Chris's party, and Gary has no intention of abusing his hospitality. And 4, he doesn't feel so good.
"You said that already," says Sylvia. Gary gets up, and Sylvia proposes that they go out again, alone this time. They plan to meet tomorrow at her apartment, and Gary goes downstairs. Cris and Peter smirk at him, knowing what he's been up to upstairs.
So the party continues, and Cris, Sheila, Richard, and Henry are sitting leaning against a wall. They keep complaining about being bored, which is a rude thing to do in front of the guy who's hosting the party. Richard says he knows of this old house they could go to. Sheila thinks that sounds cool. She'd love to go see a ghost.
Elsewhere, Dorothy is dancing while Madge scowls at her for some reason. Then Richard starts rounding up all the members of the gang to go ghost hunting.
Cris will drive some of them, and Peter will take the others, and Cris puts Peter in charge of bringing the booze.
Dorothy finds Gary and scolds him for not telling her that he had arrived, and wonders who he had been with while he was upstairs. He asks, "Don't you trust me?" and she says no.
Gary tells Dorothy not to spoil the evening. It's supposed to be a party. End flashback. She apologizes to Sergeant Pelly, but he's cool. He understands.
And no further information is conveyed in this scene. And now we're back in the present time.
We see Peter and Madge standing outside the police station. Peter is talking to someone in a car when Henry comes up as the car drives off. "Was that Cris?" Henry asks. "Yes," says Peter. He tells Henry that Gary had been reporting missing and they've been summoned to answer questions. Henry realizes that they must be bringing in people from last year's drug bust. Madge questions why Sheila was brought in if it only involved people in the drug bust. Peter tells Madge to just stay cool. Sheila has nothing to do with any of that business, so she'll be fine. As will they all, as long as they all have their stories straight.
And the 3 of them go inside the police station. Now we're going to Sylvia's flat. She's calling Dorothy. Dorothy hasn't been returning her calls. Sylvia, of course, has no idea what happened. She's worried about Gary. She hasn't seen him at work for a few days and asks Dorothy about him, and is surprised to hear that Dorothy hasn't seen him either.
As this conversation is going on, the door to Sylvia's flat slowly swings open and someone enters. Sylvia asks Dorothy to please let her know if she does see Gary. Then she hangs up and is startled to see Bob Kellett leaning against the wall, smiling at her and looking smug.
She demands to know what he's doing there. He holds up her apartment key. "You gave it to me, remember?" She demands he give it back, and he refuses, saying that he paid for it, so he's keeping it. "Then we both paid for it," she says. Sylvia tells Bob that their relationship wasn't awful, but he's making it awful now.
Sylvia goes to her purse and starts fumbling around for a cigarette. Bob lights a cigarette for himself and a second one for Sylvia. Then Bob asks if she's seen her friends lately. She says she hasn't, actually, and asks why Bob is interested. Bob says he just wondered. Then Bob asks, "Where is it?" "Where is what?" asks Sylvia. "The lighter I gave you," says Bob. "It's important. Where might you have lost it?"
Not only was it expensive, but Bob had it inscribed to Sylvia with love. Sylvia thinks that she might have lost it at that party. Bob says, "Then someone would have returned it to you. Could you have lost it at that old house?"
Sylvia asks how he even knows about that. "Never mind," says Bob. Sylvia isn't sure, but she may have left the lighter at the house. What does it matter? It's only a lighter. Only a lighter, says Bob. It could finish us both.
He leaves, gets in his car, and starts driving towards the old house. He finds the front door not locked, but stuck, so he has to shove his way in, and then turns on his flashlight so he can look around.
He goes up the stairs, and he finds a pack of cigarettes on the floor, so he must be on the right track. He goes into a room and flashes his light around. He hears a door creak and goes back into the hall to investigate. Then he heads up another flight of stairs. As he goes to open a door, someone comes behind him with a knife. Bob turns to face his assailant as the knife sinks into his gut.
Oh no. And now we're at some kind of fancy restaurant or nightclub. Sheila's wearing a green one-piece pantsuit and joins Cris and Detective Inspector Bradley at a table. Cris introduces the inspector to Sheila as the one who brought me in on a drugs charge last year. Then he changes the subject to Gary.
Cris asks the inspector if they found any evidence. The inspector says no, and Cris wonders what's the big deal then. This isn't the first time Gary's gone off the grid. Sheila asks the inspector if he thinks that Gary may have been in some sort of accident. No, hardly, says the inspector. He believes Gary is just in hiding because he had a row with his girlfriend. At that, the inspector suddenly gets up and leaves.
Why was he there? Why were they together? That's a mystery that will never be solved.
Cris orders a couple of brandies.
Sheila tells Cris that Richard called her to go out and frets that Richard may be the killer. Cris asks her to come over to his place, but she doesn't want to, given what's happened. He wonders what that's got to do with anything and then storms off to make a phone call.
In the next scene, Sheila is at the museum. Richard is there and he notices her. She sees Richard and she starts to run. Flashing back to the site of Gary's dead body, she obviously still suspects Richard of being the killer. Richard finally catches up to Sheila and asks why she ran from him. I thought you were somebody else, she says. No, it's only me, says Richard. Can we talk?
At Sheila's flat, Richard and Sheila sit on the couch. That night seems so far away, says Sheila, but Richard can't get it out of his mind. It's like it just happened. She tries to kiss him, but he pulls away.
I can think of nothing else, he says. He hardly sleeps, and when he does, he only has bad dreams of the terrible drive, digging the grave, burying him. He doesn't know if he can keep up the secrecy and lies much longer, and the knowledge that one of them is a murderer. But which one? Peter? Henry? Cris?
As they're talking, we see somebody walking towards the apartment. As Richard mentions Chris's name, Cris is there, right behind Sheila. She's mad that he just let himself into her flat. He's mad that she's with Richard when she said she wasn't going to be. She tells him to grow up.
Cris says that he came here to tell her that the gang is going to meet at his place tonight, and now that he's here, he is curious to know what she was doing there alone with Richard.
Sheila says, my God, you just act like nothing's happened. Cris asks why Sheila had to lie about Richard. Sheila goes into her kitchen and slams the door on both Richard and Cris. Cris gripes that everyone suspects everyone now.
Now, Chief Inspector John Bradley goes to see Inspector Bill Bradley, no relation, and tells him he's got another case for him and drops a file on his desk. And he tells Bill that he's got a lead for him, and he hands him a file with Sylvia Fuller's name and information. Now the gang is meeting at Chris's flat. Several of the guys are wearing ties, but Cris is slumming in a turtleneck. Richard is wearing a ruffled shirt.
Dorothy tells him that she wants to end this and talk to the police now. Peter thinks that they're in it too deep now. They should have gone to the police straight away, but they didn't, so they certainly can't do it now. And they all seem kind of surprised at themselves for not doing that, even though it was Chris's idea, and if they're going to be mad at anybody, it should be him.
The discussion continues, and Henry thinks that going to the police is what they should have done in the first place. They start to argue amongst themselves when the buzzer rings, and Cris gets up to let Sheila in.
Sheila says that Cris is dragging this out, and that they're all too scared to think straight. Peter says they've got to go back to the house and really search the place. If they can find anything that points to anyone else being the killer, then they can involve the police. Dorothy begs them to not make her go back to the house.
Madge has no interest in going back to that house, but Peter says that this is at least worth a try.
Peter says that if they find the killer, even if it is one of them, they can help them by going to the police.
Cris admits that they haven't tried going over their steps, so this sounds like it might be a good idea. And Dorothy says that, well, if it's the only way. And so they return to the horror house.
The two cars arrive at the house, and Bob's car is not with them this time. They go in the house and start looking around. They're trying to retrace their steps, do everything the same as they did that night.
Richard suggests they go into a different room, but Cris scolds them. They have to do everything as they did that night.
And that includes setting up for a seance.
They start laying down the blankets, then realize they haven't brought the tape recorder or the booze, so they'll just have to make do. This time it isn't a party after all.
Now Sergeant Pelly and a constable knock on Sylvia's door. She lets them in. A woman has reported that her husband has gone missing. Sylvia says that they can search her flat. He's not there. She's not in the habit of hiding other women's husbands.
Pelly tells her that the woman's name is Kellett, and that she said that her husband and Sylvia were friends. Bob? Asks Sylvia. He's missing? Pelly confirms and asks when Sylvia might have last seen him.
Sylvia says she saw him the other day.
She says he didn't say where he was going, but he gave her the impression he was going to look for a lighter she lost. Pelly asks where this was, and she tells him that she went to an abandoned house with some friends a few months ago. Then she grabs a map and points out where it is.
At the old deserted house, Dorothy is having a freakout. They're all holding her except for Richard. Peter explains to Richard that Dorothy sees Gary and tried to run, but they're not going to let her, so the freakout continues.
Madge says that Dorothy needs to get out of here, and Dorothy pushes Sheila into the wall. Peter says that he can drive Dorothy home. Madge is with Peter, and Henry asks for a ride as well, so that just leaves Cris, Sheila, and Richard at the horror house.
Now that they're alone, Richard wonders if Dorothy really did see Gary there. A ghost? Asks Cris. Then the three of them split up. Sheila takes a candle and dazedly walks through the upstairs of the house. Cris thinks they'd better check to make sure no one else is there. He tells Richard to check upstairs. Sheila goes back to the circle of candles and picks one up. The camera pans to reveal the door being bolted shut, and the shadow of a knife blade crosses the wall. That knife is hidden in the fireplace. Cris and Richard reconvene by the fireplace. Richard wants to leave, but Cris says they have to stay until Peter comes back, as they promised that they would wait for him. Then Richard wonders where Sheila is and goes looking for her. She's prowling around the upstairs with her candle, as we see looking in from outside the window.
Back inside, now Cris is wondering where Sheila has gone. Richard tells him that she's taken a candle with her, so she'll be fine. The two of them look out the window at the moon. It's full, says Cris, like the night of the murder. Cris starts thinking about that. The cuts into Gary were pretty deep. Richard said that Cris said himself that a madman becomes stronger when violent. Actually, I said aroused, says Cris.
That's not what happened.
It's not, but he should have.
He likes thinking about aroused killers. Cris wonders how anyone could be perfectly normal and then snap. Richard says, doesn't the moon do that to people? Cris dramatically reaches for a candle and lights it. We see his hand reaching for something, and it turns out it's just the candle.
Then we see Peter dropping Henry off pretty much in the middle of nowhere, but Henry's able to go to a phone and call the police. Inspector Bill Bradley takes the call.
We don't find out what's in that call, but it does make Bradley yell, "What?" Back at the horror house, Cris says that he knows it wasn't Sheila. Richard says about Sheila, and Cris says he gets it. Sometimes he gets so mad at her he'd like to insert violent thoughts here, but he always goes back to her.
Then Richard volunteers that he's always been afraid of the dark. Cris asks why he used to play in this house when he was a kid if he was afraid of the dark. That was different, says Richard. He was trying to prove he wasn't a coward. Richard tells Cris that Richard isn't like him. Cris makes friends easily. Cris is more like Richard's brother, John. But when he was 6, he was trapped in the cellar of an old house, and he was there for 3 days. The days were bad enough, but the nights were terrifying. The cellar was pitch black, except for the moonlight shining under the crack in the door.
That full moon saved his life, says Richard. Richard and Cris kneel down and face each other in front of the fireplace. We see a hand stealthily reaching for the knife.
Richard continues that sometimes he doesn't say things how he means them, and people laugh at him. He doesn't like it when people laugh at him, and that's why he prefers to be alone. Then we see the knife being lifted from its hiding place.
Richard starts talking about his brother, John, who got lost. Why, I don't know. And then between them, one of the two has raised the knife. We can't tell who because we don't see anyone's hands. Richard and Cris stare at each other and then stand up. And now we see that it's Richard holding the knife.
Cris, at knife point, says, "So you killed all those people." Richard says that he can kill them here, in the dark, so he doesn't have to be frightened of it anymore. Cris starts to back away. Richard goes on to say, it's worse when you're left alone when it's dark. He likes Cris, and he likes Sheila, but he thinks that Cris is like his brother John, the one who locked him in the cellar.
Richard doesn't want to be locked up again in the dark. He was locked up before, but then he got free.
Cris tells Richard to remember the story of this house. The boy killed, and then he killed himself.
Cris begs Richard to let them help him. Richard starts to aim his paranoid delusions at Cris. You don't want me to leave here, he says. You want to lock me up. Cris denies this and says that he's going to leave and Richard is not going to stop him. And he's definitely not going to kill him.
Elsewhere in the house, Sheila is still exploring, and she passes by a black-gloved hand dangling above a flashlight on the floor. This is Bob. He's been stuffed in the cupboard, and Sheila does not appear to have noticed.
Back with Richard and Cris, Richard is standing still as Cris tries to back out of the room. Richard begs Cris not to go and lowers his knife hand. Maybe the house will catch fire again. He likes fire.
Sheila starts down the stairs and gets her heel stuck in a hole in the step. Cris again says he wants to help Richard and asks Richard to hand him the knife.
Sheila unsticks her heel and puts her shoe back on. Downstairs, Richard inches closer to Cris, who's trying to get the knife from him.
And then Richard gives it to him, right in the groin.
Richard pulls the knife out. Blood gushes out of Chris's mouth and he collapses. And then Richard keeps slashing at him.
Sheila comes into the room to see Richard hacking away at Chris's corpse.
She screams and runs. Now we see that the police are coming to the house, I guess, as Richard pursues Sheila up the back stairs of the house and all through the upper floor.
She runs down the corridor, back to the main staircase, and once again gets her shoe stuck in that exact same hole. This time she falls out of her shoe and tumbles down the stairs, screaming all the way.
Richard advances toward her, knife raised, and outside it looks like the cops are near.
Richard slowly descends the stairs toward her, with a ghoulish smile on his face. As he approaches her, the clouds cover the moon and the house falls into darkness.
Richard, afraid of the dark, snaps back to not being murderous and falls on his face near Sheila. He crawls to the door and runs out.
Richard runs outside, gasping for air as the police finally pull up. Henry jumps from the police car and runs to the house.
Richard legs it across the moors, sobbing. Then he fades into candlelights, credits roll, and that's the end. Welcome back to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about Horror House from 1970.
Horror House, released as The Haunted House of Horror in the UK, was filmed in the northwest English coastal resort of Southport. Exterior scenes were shot at Bank Hall in Brotherton. The Birkdale Palace Hotel in Southport, empty and due to be demolished a year later, served as the interior of the haunted house. The hotel was turned into a live-in studio, with cast and crew staying on the upper floors and production offices on the ground floor. The haunted house rooms were all built in the hotel's ballroom, a process that took the production crew several weeks, according to the AIP Pressbook. Other locations included Carnaby Street, London, and Grimsdyke, Harrow. Filming took place in October of 1968, and the budget for Horror House was $192,000, which was split between Tygon and AIP.
Michael Armstrong wrote a screenplay called The Dark in 1960 when he was 15 years old. He revised it in 1967, quote, further developing its darker psychosexual themes and sharpening the characters and dialogue to reflect the current cynical underbelly beneath the superficial 60s culture, according to a story published at michaelarmstrong.co.uk, from which we have learned all of the production information about Horror House that we're going to be talking about. In the second draft, Armstrong wrote the character of Richard specifically for David Bowie, penning a scene where the character would perform a song or two in a cabaret. Bowie had appeared in Armstrong's 1964 short film The Image. This is the draft that was bought by Tygon and sent to AIP, which approved it for co-production.
Louis M. Deke Hayward was AIP's executive responsible for overseeing movie production in Great Britain, and as pre-production continued, he and Armstrong became more and more adversarial. Hayward made Armstrong rewrite his draft to add sex scenes and Americanize the characters of Cris and Sheila so AIP could cast their contracted actors. Hayward also demanded Armstrong include a character to be played by Boris Karloff. For that, Armstrong expanded the character of the police inspector.
Armstrong's third draft of the screenplay was heavily edited by Hayward, who cut out almost all of the early expository scenes and hand-scribbled onto the backs of the excise pages rambling scenes of a crazed police inspector to be played by Karloff in a wheelchair rampaging around the derelict house and other locations, apparently out for bloody vengeance, and finally turning out to be a red herring.
In order to appease both sides, producer Tony Tensor wanted to make two versions, one for AIP, the other for Tygon, but the budget would not allow them to shoot two completely different films, so Armstrong was forced to accept Hayward's cuts and to cobble together, as best he could, the remaining fragments of his screenplay into a fourth draft. This resulted in the first two visits to the house being merged into one and inevitable alterations in character and relationships, including Dorothy already being a part of the group and Nigel, now called Gary, involved in an opening sex sequence with Sylvia, according to the site. The fourth draft was the final shooting script.
For the role of Cris, Hayward gave Armstrong the choice between two AIP contract players, Frankie Avalon or Fabian. Armstrong opted for Avalon. Hayward insisted that Avalon and Bowie would clash and refused to allow Armstrong to use him, so the role of Richard went to Julian Barnes. This was a double blow to Armstrong, who had hoped to use Bowie as the film's composer.
When Boris Karloff became too ill to play the chief inspector, Hayward decided he could use Karloff as the film's narrator, with the actor propped up in an armchair, making an introductory speech before the film began. Armstrong wrote that introduction, but Karloff's health deteriorated so much that it was never filmed.
Tygon was forced to pay for an additional 2 weeks filming by AIP, who originally gave Armstrong 4 weeks instead of a 6-week shooting schedule. Armstrong wrote material to partially replace character and story elements lost as a result of Hayward's original pre-shoot rewrite of the screenplay. A new producer named Gary Levy was the only person to see these scenes, apart from the film's editor. According to the Armstrong site, at a crucial meeting between Tygon and AIP from which Hayward insisted Armstrong be excluded, Levy replaced Armstrong's scenes with scenes of his own, which Hayward willingly agreed he should direct. For these scenes, Levy took a screenwriting credit as Peter Marcus, and those scenes include the ones which depict Sylvia's affair with Bob, the numerous police station episodes, the pub sing-along, and the Carnaby Street scenes. Actually, the pub sing-along wasn't in the AIP version.
Deke Hayward had threatened to dismiss Armstrong if he didn't like the first week's rushes of the shoot. But in the end, he never saw them. Hayward was called away on the Cy Enfield movie, Desaad, which had run into serious problems, and Samuel Arkoff and James Nicholson viewed the rushes and were quite pleased. They not only allowed Armstrong to continue on the film, they entered into a competition with Tony Tensor over who would be able to sign Armstrong to a multi-film contract after the completion of Horror House.
During post-production, Arkoff and Nicholson arrived in London and asked to show the film's rough cut to an audience of international buyers. There is no edited Hayward cut to show them, so, quote, Tensor ripped Armstrong's unseen cut apart overnight, added the risible footage of Dennis Price in a wheelchair, and to try and cover resultant gaps in this new version, he instructed the editor to put in cutaways of anything to hand. the moon, owls, London streets, famous landmarks.
Armstrong was horrified by the results, later telling Nicholson that this cut had nothing to do with him. The next day, Arkoff and Nicholson wanted to know what went wrong. Armstrong tried to explain Hayward's interference, but Hayward laid all the blame on Armstrong and Tensor for shortening the shooting schedule. While Armstrong was attempting to re-edit the footage to something resembling his vision of the film, Levy took over to salvage the film, and it was said that Armstrong was under no circumstances to contact Arkoff or Nicholson. No one ever expressed an interest in seeing Armstrong's cut of the film.
Haunted House of Horror was released in the United Kingdom in November of 1969. Horror House debuted in the United States on April 15, 1970, on the same bill as The Crimson Cult, starring Boris Karloff.
AIP's press book suggested they issue warnings to patrons that the combination of the two films were not for the faint of heart, and to staff the lobby with a medical staff and first aid equipment to aid those who found the films detrimental to their health. Box Office Magazine recommended theater owners place a blood-soaked dummy in a coffin in the lobby to excite interest in Horror House, while the press book's idea was to make a coffin attraction for theater patrons to fit in or walk through.
Another idea from the AIP press book was to place classified ads in the newspaper searching for a woman or women to sit through the double feature, alone in the theater at midnight with the lights out, as a stunt for the press, of course. We found two places where this actually happened, and both were in England. On November 1st, 1969, a classified ad appeared in the Reading Evening Post looking for, quote, a young lady with nerves of steel to view Haunted House of Horror, along with the British co-feature, which was a crime drama called Clegg. Mrs. Veronica Musean of Reading answered the ad and viewed the movie alone, if you don't count the local press members there with her, at a midnight showing. Musean said of the film, I enjoyed it, but I have seen better horror films. Also, a Miss Janet Newbold of Lincolnshire went even further by spending the night in the foyer of the ABC Cinema, Lincoln, after viewing Haunted House of Horror. They may have done it in America, I just couldn't find any instances of it. Taglines for Horror House include, Beyond its forbidden doors an evil secret hides.
Scream and no one will hear you. Run and silent footsteps will follow you. Cross a new threshold of terror into Horror House.
The dead are restless tonight at Horror House.
For the combination of Crimson Cult and Horror House, the taglines were, Shock after blood-chilling shock.
Terror and torture join forces.
A nightmare combination of shock and terror.
Twice the terror, 10 times the shock.
In a short blurb in the Darlington Northern Echo, the reviewer said Horror House was a tepidly told tale of tawdry and tingling terror, and that it was more likely to induce sleep than nightmares.
Frankie Avalon did an interview with Mary Daniels of the Chicago Tribune around the time of Horror House's release, and according to her, Avalon, quote, winced at a newspaper ad for Horror House and said, I don't think I'm going to see that one. I think I'll pass on it. I don't want to get depressed.
Well, yeah, he lost his dick.
He lost everything.
Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times said of Horror House and Crimson Cult that the two transcend their formula plots through exceptional scripting, efficient directing, and intelligent performances. However, it should be stated at the outset that Horror House has 2 scenes of bloody slaughter that will make a mockery of its lenient GP rating. Thomas praised Julian Barnes' performance in particular.
In the Ludington Daily News, the author of Cases column wrote of Horror House, appearing that weekend at the Starlight Drive-In, the second feature is Horror House, and I'm glad I don't have to read that one over the radio. Imagine how carefully you'd have to enunciate the title to avoid having it sound like something else. And don't ever think the people who named it knew not whereof they named.
Don Harris in the Tulsa Daily World said Horror House starred, get this, Frankie Avalon, in quite a step from beach blanket to haunted pad, but Frankie, the world's oldest living teenager, makes the switch in grand style. He continued saying, the middle of this film is filled with views of 43 expensive sweaters worn by Avalon, and the return to the scene of the crime by all those who haven't been killed off or bored to death. The whole mess fades into well-earned oblivion, with the crazy killer sobbing and running through the moors, running from himself, from his evil deeds, and from the acting reputation he'll earn from this dull, low-budget quickie.
Miles Standish in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch said Horror House, quote, relies too much on blood rather than eeriness for its punch. A maniac hacking people to death may be exciting, but I'd prefer something a little more subtle, like an eerie mood.
Box Office Magazine's review said Horror House was the top and better half of AIP's British-made horror combo, calling it surprisingly effective and well done. Leading the cast of young faces, all of whom are uniformly impressive, are Frankie Avalon and Jill Haworth. While neither has been associated very much with the horror genre, both are effective. Avalon acquits himself rather well as the prime suspect in some grisly knife murders.
So full disclosure, we have both versions of the movie. We have Haunted House of Horror, which we got on DVD, and on YouTube, Horror House is available, the AIP cut. And we watched both of them. We first watched Haunted House of Horror because we figured we'd watch the way it was supposed to be maybe first and then see the AIP version. But from everything we learned from the Michael Armstrong site, it seems like we never really saw the version of the movie we were supposed to see. And that's too bad.
But what we did see from the two films is this is another example of AIP just hacking a film to pieces that has no resemblance whatsoever to what it originally was.
I never found anything that explained why the British version had 10 more minutes and that it was in a completely different order than the American version. That's just compounded by knowing all the changes that Deke Hayward wrought upon the movie.
Well, I think it was just a matter of AIP wanting to get to the action. Let's get to the haunted house. So they did that first because all the stuff that's in flashback is at the beginning of the British version. It's told linearly in the original cut in Haunted House of Horror.
And there's no awkward flashback insert in the middle. Dorothy is flashing back to events that she was never witness to. Yeah, so apparently the thinking behind making that version for America was that Americans can't wait for all this exposition to happen. They need to get right to the first murder, and then later we can explain who all these people are, which seems really dumb and kind of insulting.
Well, it seems like a good idea if it's executed that way, but we're just thrown in with these people who we're supposed to already know who they are, or at least have some idea, and they're just going to a haunted house for kicks, I guess, and they just go in, start wandering around, and they're reacting to each other because they know each other. We don't know the characters yet, so we don't know exactly what's going on between them.
Yeah, we don't even know their names at first, unless one of them happens to mention another character's name, but it's not like we're introduced to them in any meaningful way.
We watched Haunted House of Horror first, so I don't know if we ever really determined that Dorothy and Gary were supposed to have been together until Dorothy's flashback. We knew because we had seen it already, but I don't think that there's anything in the context of the AIP version that says that.
I thought there was just one brief moment where he kisses her when they're getting ready to explore the house. I thought they had a little clinch there. I mean, it was just a second, and if you weren't watching that second, you would have missed it.
And he goes out after Sylvia when she leaves.
Yeah, that's true. Well, he's a player. This one would have been so confusing had we not watched the other version first.
And also in the AIP edit, Bob shows up. He's just some creepy guy lurking around outside, but you don't know why. You find out later that he's following Sylvia around. But you find through Dorothy's flashback somehow. But
Dorothy has no idea Bob exists, but yet she can flash back to him. And there was one scene that was cut. The bachelor party that Gary had to go to, that scene was cut entirely, probably because it doesn't matter in either version of the film. Gary's in a pub with a group of guys who really aren't part of this movie. They sing a stupid song about how dumb it is to get married. We missed that part of it.
I didn't miss it.
It was deleted, let's just say. I mean, I do appreciate when they shorten a movie, but not when they take out stuff that makes sense. And they must have taken other stuff out. Oh, the part where Madge is trying to squeeze into that tight space between the two rooms.
There were a lot of jokes about Madge's weight in the British version that aren't in the AIP version.
Yeah, that's fine. They don't need that.
When AIP does this to a film, they don't think of the consequences of the cuts they're making. We saw this with The Wild Party. I think we saw that with Those Fantastic Flying Fools / Blast Off.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And here, it's all because of that flashback sequence that actually is supposed to occur at the beginning of the film, being told by Dorothy, which leaves all kinds of loose ends. She actually tells Sergeant Pelly that they all left to go to this house, that nobody's supposed to even know that they were there, and that Gary was with them the whole time.
Her flashback ended when they were leaving the party. So we don't know what she told him about the point where they left.
She told him that they had a row.
And I guess he went off on his own.
But part of the plan was them never mentioning going to this house. So she did mention they were all going ghost hunting to an abandoned house.
In Haunted House of Horror, did she mention that? Because she didn't mention that.
She didn't mention it because it wasn't a flashback in the original movie. It was just part of the flashback when everybody's getting ready to go to the house, because as they leave, they were talking to each other. We're going to go ghost hunting. So she must have told Pelly this.
So yeah, if she relayed it word for word, that's what she said. When you think of a flashback and somebody listening to you explain this whole thing, like all the details. And so this person is explaining all of this to whoever's listening to the flashback. It's just funny to think about that, especially the extended ones.
There was something else we did here recently where there was like 30 minutes of flashback. And I think it was another example of when AIP just recut the film.
And there really was nothing to lose by leaving that part intact. They could have cut out the bachelor party scene and left them getting together first scene at the beginning of the movie. We could establish characters first. That's what all the slashers do now. Well, actually, they have a cold open and somebody gets killed. And then we go back and establish character. But there were no real slashers back in 1969 as we know them today.
Not as we know them today, but we had things like Blood Feast coming out, Herschel Gordon Lewis, and Psycho from Alfred Hitchcock. And so there was knife murders for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But they couldn't be as graphic and violent This was pretty graphic and violent for its time. Not like Blood Feast, obviously, but the blood in those films, it looks like pink paint. So it doesn't seem as gory as it tries to be. It's gory, but it almost is cartoonish in its execution.
I have a feeling that if we could see Michael Armstrong's original vision for the film, if Deke Hayward hadn't stuck his nose in and changed everything, I think this would have been a much better movie. I think it might have made sense. I don't think the killer's motivation made all that much sense to me because he wanted to be in the dark with his victims, and yet the dark at the end was what made him not kill Sheila.
Yeah, his motive isn't exactly clear. I think we just are supposed to think he's obviously crazy.
Well, one of the things that got excised from Armstrong's version was, and this is probably for the better, a scene of Richard making a pass at one of the guys and getting rejected. So they're establishing that Richard is a repressed homosexual and that this could be possibly the reason for his mania. And that was completely cut. They didn't want any of those scenes in either version of the film.
That's probably just as well. It would work for the film, but
it's insulting.
It's presenting a homosexual character in a negative way.
Because he's
basically
homosexual.
saying, right, exactly. It's because he's homosexual that he acts this way. So that's not exactly something that AIP could be proud of.
Nobody should be proud of that.
Of all the things I thought I might never see in a film, Frankie Avalon getting stabbed in the groin is probably pretty near the top of the list.
I have said on this podcast before that I don't always care for Frankie Avalon's acting style. It's very cornball. I actually liked him a lot more here than I have in any other movie. But then when that scene happened, I was like, oh, wow, is this movie just made for me?
He has that one line where he says, is there anyone here who can prove they didn't kill Gary? And the line reading, it just seems so Frankie.
But he's actually kind of a normal guy in the rest of it. He doesn't try to sing. Like if they wanted David Bowie to sing in the cabaret, they could have had Frankie do it, but thank goodness they didn't.
He wore really nice sweaters. You can't tell in the AIP version we watched because the print was so faded. It was uploaded to YouTube from a 16 millimeter print. But the Blu-ray looks pretty good and the colors really pop in it. Everybody's color coordinated in every scene they're in. At the beginning of the film, they're all wearing, it's kind of a goldish, greenish yellow.
I thought it was more of a buttery yellow.
I don't think it was that bright.
Well, it sort of runs a spectrum. For some reason, Sheila's wearing something that looks like a bridesmaid's gown. Richard has on a little yellow ascot that doesn't match his shirt. Frankie's got his bright yellow sweater on. Madge is wearing green, so she's not part of it. Peter looks like a vicar, the white collar on a black shirt and black pants.
Henry doesn't stand out at all, except he does wear a tie to Chris's meeting.
There's always somebody that doesn't follow the program. Oh, and Dorothy was in yellow too.
Sylvia wore white.
And Sylvia, who obviously wasn't a big part of the gang, did not wear yellow.
I don't think we ever see her in anything other than like a white or off-white or light gray. She's always in that color palette.
Must really flatter her.
What about the museum scene? That was kind of weird. It reminded me, this would obviously come later, but it had the same kind of feeling of Dressed to Kill when Angie Dickinson is running through the museum, but she's kind of playing a cat and mouse game with that guy who's not chasing her. They're going to hook up in the car later.
It seems more sinister than it is. She's being pursued and she seems not to like it until she does.
In Dressed to Kill.
Yeah, in Dressed to Kill. In Horror House, Sheila does not like being pursued. It's a wild scene where she's tearing through this museum and nobody's trying to stop her. But what we didn't mention was the music that was happening. It was just like an oboe and a trumpet screeching at each other, discordant notes fighting each other. And then all the while she's flashing back to Gary's dead body. It was like their psychological terror moment of the movie.
Just a series of quick cuts. You see Sheila, then you see Gary's body, and then you see Richard chasing her, and then you see Gary's body, and it's just flashing one to another while this oboe music is playing.
I don't know that Richard's running after her, but he just catches up to her at some point.
Oh, he's running. He's showing running.
Oh, okay. And he just seems totally normal. Like, oh no, it was just me. But for some reason it spooked her.
Well, she doesn't know for sure, but he turns out to be a murderer, so she's rightly spooked.
But then she tries to kiss him later after they go back to her
That's
place.
probably a thing left over from the homosexual part of the script that they took out, because he just kind of turns away and says, I can't think about this.
All right, well, obviously there's a lot going on in this movie, and we could talk about it for hours, but let's just rate it instead. Using our AIP scale, where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic, Jeff, how would you rate Horror House?
Well, I'm rating the AIP version of Horror House, which is inferior to Haunted House of Horror, in my view. And I'm trying to think of if I had seen this without seeing Haunted House of Horror first. And I would be very confused at first because you don't know who the characters are. It doesn't matter. At least they don't all look alike, like in some films we've seen. Or at least you can tell the characters apart, so that helps. And I don't know if I would feel like thrown into it or not. I imagine that I would. Just all of a sudden I'm with these people in these cars and they're going to this house and just exploring without letting me know the reason that they're there. And it's really difficult for me to put myself in the position of seeing it that way for the first time. I think that Haunted House of Horror is a decent film. It's definitely not a great film. And the AIP version is shy of the Haunted House of Horror. But Horror House is okay enough that I'm going to give it an I. It's not one that I'm going to be racing to watch again anytime soon. If I go to watch this film, I'll probably watch the British version because it's the superior cut. But I'm still going to give an I to the AIP American version of Horror House. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that even if I were to grade The Haunted House of Horror, I would give it the same grade as Horror House, mostly because the best scenes are the scenes inside the haunted house. Those are the scenes that are the most effective and the most meaningful. And everything else that Deke Hayward inserted really detract from that. And it sounds like he could have made it much worse than it is, and that it sort of got rescued. But like I said before, I think that the original cut of the movie might have been something pretty cool, and this one isn't. And again, I have to take it down a notch like you did for Horror House, the AIP cut, because they really did make it worse. And had we not seen Haunted House of Horror first, I think I would have been really frustrated and upset with the movie, as I always am when I'm trying to figure out who people are and I don't know. And IMDb won't help. So yeah, definitely it would give it an I too. But because the stuff that I do like is good enough, I'm not going to give it a P. Like you, for me, it's going to hit in the middle with an I.
The interesting thing about Horror House is that it has never had a home video release in America. The British cut has been available overseas, and we can get it here as an import, but it's never been available in America. If it weren't for some kind soul uploading it to YouTube a year ago, we would have had to look at the British version of this. We wouldn't have access to the AIP version. So
no.
Thank you. So we were lucky to have been able to do this, but there are several titles that we're still looking for in order to cover those ones as well. And we could really use your help in our never-ending quest for thoroughness. If you can help, you can go to our website, aippod.com. And there you can find a Help Us tab that lists some of the movies that we're looking for. Some of them we have in foreign versions with no subtitles, and they're not going to be the AIP cut. We'd love to find the AIP cut of some of these. Or at the very least, if you have a subtitle version, that would help us too, because neither Cheryl nor myself are bilingual or trilingual or quadlingual.
But we can read.
And also on the site, you can contact us to let us know that you have these films and are happy to share them with us. And you could let us know what you liked or didn't like about what we had to say about your favorite film. Or you can request a film you'd like us to take off the back burner and move it up front if you're anxious for us to cover it. Or if you just want to say, hey, you could do that too. And also you can find trailers, posters, lobby cards of the films that we've covered. You can find out where you can stream the films that we've covered. And of course, there's a link to our store where a purchase of a t-shirt or mug will help keep the podcast going and the website alive. So again, that's aippod.com.
All right, now I think it's time to close and lock the door of the Horror House. For the American International Podcast, I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And I'm Jeff Markin.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in.
Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.